September 16, 2022, a 22-year-old woman named Mahsa Amini died in police custody in Tehran. Her crime? Wearing her headscarf improperly. Her death sparked a movement that challenged the foundations of the Islamic Republic. Millions chanted woman, life, freedom as they demanded change. From the streets of Tehran to small villages in Kurdistan, ordinary people stood against one of the world's most controlling governments. Yet this story goes far deeper than one tragic death. To understand why Iran keeps erupting in protest, we must travel back through a century of contradictions and broken promises. Iran has been a land of kings for thousands of years. By the early 1900s, this ancient nation stood at a crossroads. The ruling Qajar dynasty had grown weak, and foreign powers circled like vultures. Britain and Russia had already carved out pieces of Iranian influence through unfair treaties and economic control. Something was changing among the educated classes. Merchants who traveled to Europe brought back stories of parliaments and constitutions. They spoke of places where kings answered to the people, where laws protected ordinary citizens. These ideas spread through tea houses and secret meetings. By 1905, frustration boiled over. When the government announced new taxes to pay back Russian loans, market traders shut down their stores in protest. Religious leaders joined them. Together, they demanded something revolutionary, a constitution that would limit the king's absolute power. The Constitutional Revolution of 1906 forced the dying Shah to sign a document that created Iran's first parliament. This constitution borrowed heavily from European models, particularly the Belgian system. For a brief moment, Iran glimpsed the possibility of democratic governance, yet the victory remained incomplete. Religious authorities insisted that Islamic law would still guide the nation. The constitution forbade any legislation that contradicted Sharia principles. This tension between secular reform and religious tradition would echo through the next 100 years of Iranian history. During this period, the first Iranian women's movements emerged. Female activists called for girls to attend school, for women to receive proper health care, and for an end to child marriages. A few brave voices went further, questioning the requirement that women cover themselves in public. One feminist writer named Siddiqui Dowlatabadi published articles criticizing the veil in a newspaper called Women's Voice. Her reward was constant death threats. A mob nearly attacked her office. The push for women's freedom had begun, but the resistance proved fierce. Still, the ideas kept spreading. Iranian elites who visited Paris and London returned with visions of a modernized homeland. In cities like Tehran, some women began appearing without traditional coverings. The veil started to symbolize backwardness in the eyes of urban progressives, while rural communities held fast to tradition. Everything changed in 1925 when a military officer named Reza Khan seized the throne. He crowned himself Reza Shah and founded the Pahlavi dynasty. This former soldier had grand ambitions. He wanted to drag Iran into the modern world, whether Iranians liked it or not. Reza Shah admired what he saw in neighboring Turkey. The Turkish leader Ataturk had transformed his nation from an Islamic empire into a secular republic. Women there had discarded their veils and entered universities. Reza Shah wanted the same transformation for Iran. He launched sweeping reforms that touched every aspect of Iranian life. Men were required to wear European-style suits and French hats instead of traditional robes. New schools opened across the country. The University of Tehran was established in 1934. Roads and railways connected cities that had been isolated for centuries. Then came the most controversial change of all. In 1936, Reza Shah banned the veil completely. Police were ordered to remove headscarves from any woman who wore one in public. For progressive urban women, this felt like liberation. They could finally walk freely without covering themselves. For millions of traditional women, the same law felt like assault. Many religious families kept their daughters and wives locked inside their homes rather than allow them to appear uncovered in public. Some women stayed indoors for years, refusing to abandon their deeply held beliefs. Religious leaders saw these reforms as an attack on Islam itself. Even government officials resisted. The prime minister refused to wear Western suits, clinging to traditional Iranian clothing. In 1935, security forces opened fire on protesters at Gohar Shad Mosque, killing dozens who resisted the changes. Here lies the great tragedy of Iranian modernization. It came through force. Reza Shah gave his people roads and schools and factories. He gave women access to education and public spaces. Yet he gave them no choice in any of it. The reforms that might have succeeded through gradual persuasion instead created deep resentment. One Iranian thinker described his nation as a short-term society where change came in sudden, explosive bursts. There was no slow evolution, no gradual shift in attitudes. Laws appeared overnight and vanished just as quickly. Society swung between extremes, always at the mercy of whoever held power. In 1941, British and Soviet forces invaded Iran. They accused Reza Shah of being too friendly with Nazi Germany. The Allies forced him to abdicate in favor of his young son, Mohammad Reza. Just like that, one era ended and another began. Mohammad Reza Shah inherited a fractured nation. His father's harsh methods had created enemies everywhere. The new king took a softer approach at first. He lifted the ban on veiling, allowing women to choose their own clothing. He kept his father's educational reforms while easing the pressure on religious communities. A strange thing happened. Without the force of law behind it, the practice of going unveiled began to fade. Many women who had embraced Western dress during Reza Shah's reign returned to traditional clothing. The change had been imposed from above, and when that pressure lifted, old habits returned. This revealed a painful truth about Iranian society. Progressive reforms that arrived through royal decree lacked deep roots. There had been no education campaign, no effort to win hearts and minds. Women had been told to remove their veils, yet they had received no explanation of why they should embrace this new freedom. The young Shah dreamed of transforming Iran into a regional superpower. Oil revenue poured into the treasury, and he spent it on ambitious projects. In 1963, he launched what he called the White Revolution. This program promised land reform, literacy campaigns, and new rights for women, including the vote. On paper, the White Revolution achieved remarkable things. Nearly 90% of tenant farmers became landowners. Health clinics appeared in rural villages. Young men could fulfill their military service by teaching villagers to read and write. Women entered universities in growing numbers. Yet the same old pattern repeated. The Shah implemented these changes without building consensus. Land reform stripped power from traditional landlords, but it also disrupted rural economies. Millions of agricultural workers flooded into cities looking for factory jobs that did not exist. Tehran exploded in population. Rural migrants poured into neighborhoods that lacked proper housing, sanitation, or schools. These newcomers brought conservative religious values into a city that was rapidly westernizing. Two versions of Iran collided on the same streets. The religious establishment watched these changes with growing alarm. The reforms undermined centuries of clerical power over education, law, and charitable lands. A fierce cleric named Ruhollah Khomeini emerged as the voice of opposition. In 1964, after denouncing the Shah's reforms, Khomeini was forced into exile. The Shah grew increasingly paranoid. His secret police, the Savak, monitored conversations and imprisoned dissidents. Political parties were banned or controlled. Torture became a common tool of interrogation. The more the Shah modernized Iran's economy, the more he tightened his grip on its politics. By the mid-1970s, cracks appeared everywhere. Oil prices crashed, and the government slashed spending on development projects. Educated young Iranians found themselves unemployed despite their degrees. Workers who had been promised prosperity saw their wages eaten by inflation. Something deeper had gone wrong. The Shah presented himself as the father of a modern nation, yet his people saw him as a puppet of Western powers. America and Britain had helped restore him to power in 1953 after a brief challenge to his authority. Foreign influence seemed to reach into every corner of Iranian life. A popular book called West Oxification captured the mood. Its author argued that Western culture was poisoning Iranian identity. Young people imitated American movies while their grandparents clung to ancient traditions. The nation suffered from a kind of cultural confusion, torn between two worlds. In this environment, the veil transformed from a simple garment into a political symbol. Women who had worn Western dress began covering themselves again as a form of protest. The headscarf said, "I reject the Shah, and everything he represents. I stand with the people against foreign corruption. The opposition united around an unlikely figure. From exile in Iraq and later France, Ayatollah Khomeini sent tape-recorded sermons that circulated through mosques across Iran. His message was simple. The Shah had betrayed Islam, and only a return to religious values could save the nation. Throughout 1978, protests grew larger and more frequent. In January, demonstrations erupted in Qom. By fall, millions were marching in cities across the country. Oil workers went on strike. Shopkeepers shuttered their stores. The economy ground to a halt. The Shah's military had the firepower to crush the uprising. His elite forces remained loyal. Yet the regular army wavered. Soldiers refused to fire on their own families. Thousands deserted rather than carry out orders against protesters. On January 16, 1979, Mohammad Reza Shah boarded a plane and left Iran forever. He told his prime minister, "I leave Iran in your care, yours and God's." Tears streamed down his face as the aircraft lifted off. The Pahlavi dynasty, which had ruled for over 50 years, was finished. 2 weeks later, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to a hero's welcome. Millions filled the streets of Tehran to greet him. The crowd was so massive that his motorcade could barely move. A new era had begun for Iran, though few understood what it would bring. The revolution had united people from across Iranian society. Communists marched alongside religious conservatives. Liberal intellectuals joined traditionalist merchants. Everyone had a reason to despise the Shah, even if they agreed on little else. Khomeini understood that he needed this broad coalition to succeed. Before the revolution, he made promises to everyone. He assured liberals that women would keep their rights. He told leftists that the new government would serve the poor. He suggested that clerics would play a spiritual role while elected officials ran the country. These promises evaporated within months. Khomeini and his inner circle moved swiftly to consolidate power. The provisional government was packed with religious loyalists. Opposition parties were banned. Newspapers that criticized the new order were shut down. For women, the betrayal came quickly and brutally. On March 8, 1979, International Women's Day, Khomeini announced that female government workers must wear the hijab. Tens of thousands of women poured into the streets in protest. For 6 days, they marched and chanted for freedom of choice. The government temporarily backed down, but only to regroup. Laws that had protected women during divorce were repealed. Female judges were removed from courts. By 1983, the hijab became mandatory for all women in all public spaces. Those who refused faced fines, imprisonment, and public humiliation. A new constitution established the principle of velayat-e-faqih, or guardianship of the Islamic jurist. This meant that a supreme leader, always a senior cleric, would hold ultimate authority over all matters of state. Elections existed, but only candidates approved by religious authorities could run. The Revolutionary Guards emerged as an armed force loyal only to Khomeini. They hunted down enemies of the new order with ruthless efficiency. Thousands were executed, often after brief show trials. Former officials, suspected monarchists, and political rivals all faced the firing squad. One Christian bishop who had welcomed the revolution wrote bitterly, "We exchange one form of oppression for another, even more severe." Many Iranians who had risked their lives fighting the Shah now found themselves targeted by the clerics who replaced him. The Iran-Iraq War, which began in 1980 and lasted 8 years, allowed the new regime to silence internal criticism. Anyone who questioned the government could be labeled a traitor helping the enemy. The war killed hundreds of thousands and devastated the economy, yet it helped the clerics cement their control. Decades passed, but the desire for freedom refused to die. In 1999, students protested against press restrictions. In 2009, millions marched against what they believed was a stolen presidential election. The Green Movement filled Tehran's streets before being crushed by security forces. Each generation learned hard lessons from the one before. The movement for change grew more sophisticated. Activists used social media to organize and document abuses. Women launched campaigns like My Stealthy Freedom, posting photos of themselves without hijab in small acts of daily resistance. Then came September 2022. Mahsa Amini, a a 22-year-old Kurdish woman visiting Tehran, was arrested by the morality police. Her alleged crime was wearing her headscarf improperly. 3 days after her arrest, she was dead. Witnesses who saw her in custody said she had been severely beaten by officers. The government dismissed these accounts and claimed she died of natural causes. Her death ignited something unprecedented across the entire nation. Within days, protests spread to every single province in Iran. Young women tore off their headscarves and burned them in public squares, while crowds gathered to watch. Students filled university campuses and city streets, chanting slogans calling for the downfall of the supreme leader himself. The movement adopted a Kurdish phrase as its battle cry: woman, life, freedom. These three words echoed through neighborhoods and villages, uniting people who had long felt silence. The government responded with characteristic brutality that shocked observers around the world. Security forces used live ammunition against protesters in the streets. Thousands upon thousands were arrested and dragged into detention centers. Young people faced show trials where verdicts seemed decided before proceedings even began. Death sentences were handed down to protesters barely out of their teenage years. Yet despite this crushing response, the protesters kept coming. They returned to the streets night after night, facing tear gas and bullets with remarkable courage. A United Nations investigation later concluded that Iranian authorities had committed crimes against humanity in their efforts to silence the uprising. By spring 2023, the mass protests had subsided under relentless and unforgiving pressure from security forces. The political leadership remained in power, apparently unchanged and unmoved by months of demonstrations. Yet something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface of Iranian society. Surveys conducted during this period showed that nearly 80% of Iranians opposed mandatory hijab laws. Young women continued to appear in public without head coverings, quietly defying the law every single day in small but meaningful acts of resistance. The morality police still patrolled the streets, but their authority had been permanently damaged in the eyes of millions. The story continues even now, unfolding in ways that mirror past struggles. In late 2025 and early 2026, economic protests over rising prices and a collapsing currency transformed into another wave of demonstrations against the government itself. What began as anger over inflation quickly became something larger and more dangerous for the regime. Some protesters began chanting in support of the exiled crown prince, the son of the last Shah who had fled decades earlier. History seemed to circle back on itself in unexpected ways. Understanding Iran means understanding a century filled with painful contradictions. Progressive reforms arrived through the iron fist of dictators who gave their people no voice in the matter. Religious revival became a weapon against foreign influence and Western corruption. The same headscarf that once symbolized resistance to the Shah and his forced modernization now represents submission to the clerics who replaced him. What remains constant through all these changes is the Iranian people's deep hunger for choice. Under the Shah, women who wanted to veil according to their beliefs were punished and humiliated. Under the Islamic Republic, women who want to go bareheaded face the same treatment from different oppressors. Both regimes missed the essential point that their citizens tried to communicate. It was always about the freedom to decide for themselves. The protests that shake Iran today carry echoes of every uprising that came before them. Mothers who marched against the Shah in 1979 now watch their granddaughters burn headscarves in 2022. The methods and slogans change with the times, but the fundamental demand remains exactly the same across generations. Iran's future remains unwritten, uncertain, and full of possibility. The Islamic Republic faces its greatest challenges in over 4 decades of existence. Economic collapse threatens daily life, international isolation grows deeper, and a population that has lost faith in the system refuses to stay silent. Yet the regime maintains its grip on the security forces and shows little sign of voluntary reform or compromise. Perhaps the most important lesson from Iran's long and turbulent history is this: change that comes without the consent of the governed rarely lasts beyond the ruler who imposed it. Reza Shah forced women to remove their veils at gunpoint, and when he fell from power, many put them back on immediately. The Islamic Republic forces women to wear them under threat of prison, and a new generation removes them in bold defiance. The Iranian people have shown again and again that they will accept only the choices they make themselves through their own free will. Dictators from both ends of the political spectrum have tried to impose their visions on this ancient and proud land. Both have discovered the limits of force against a people determined to be free on their own terms. Whether through wearing the veil or removing it, Iranians have always found ways to express their resistance to tyranny. The symbol matters less than what it represents underneath. The eternal human desire to live according to one's own conscience and beliefs. That desire has survived kings and ayatollahs alike through decades of oppression. It will outlast whatever comes next.